How would you react if your husband showed up to your funeral with his mistress? Imagine a church with 200 guests, a beautiful mahogany casket, and inside, a pregnant woman who died way too soon. Then, the main door
How could you
opens.
do this? You stole
Her
everything,
husband
Marcus!
walks in, holding hands with the
Please, I can
woman he was
explain.
cheating on her with,
It wasn't
but
like
nobody
that.
there knew the real story.
Let go of me!
The wife
How
in
dare
that
you
casket
do this?
was
I
no
demand that
victim.
you release me
She was
right
a
now.
genius.
I have done
Everyone
nothing
thought
wrong.
she was just a sweet elementary school teacher, but she was secretly building a $47 million business. While her husband was planning to take all her money and leave with his new woman, she was recording every single lie and betrayal. She made a video to be played at her own funeral, a video that would bring down everyone who thought she was weak. You will not believe what happens next. You have to stick around for this, because the final twist is something no one could have predicted. This story will teach you the most powerful lesson about strength, patience, and why the quietest people are often the most dangerous. If you have ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or trapped by someone who thought they owned you, stay until the end. This one is for you. This is the story of Rachel Morrison, and it is about how a woman got her revenge from beyond the grave. The polished mahogany coffin was displayed at the front of St. Andrew's Church, a symbol of a life cut short. It was surrounded by bouquets of white lilies, and the soft glow of candlelight flickered across its surface. The pews were filled with 200 mourners, all dressed in black, their faces showing the deep sadness that comes with losing someone so young. The air was heavy, with the fragrance of flowers mixed with expensive perfume, but underneath it all was a feeling of shock and disbelief, and in the center of it all, inside that stunning coffin, lay Rachel Morrison, a 32-year-old school teacher. She was a loving friend, a mother-to-be, and now she was gone. I was in the third row, holding a tissue that was already completely soaked. My black dress felt uncomfortably tight, as if the grief itself was squeezing my chest. My name is Claire Bennett, and the woman in the coffin was more than just my friend. She was my sister. We had been inseparable since we were 7 years old, sharing every adventure and secret for 25 years. That is a quarter century of friendship, of late-night talks, of wiping away tears and sharing laughs. We had countless phone calls that lasted all night, and Sunday brunches where we thought we could solve all the world's problems. Now, all of that was finished, ending here in this cold church with its high ceilings and beautiful stained glass windows that seemed to make fun of our sadness. Rachel was 8 months pregnant when she passed away, carrying a little girl she planned to name Hope. Miraculously, the baby was delivered by an emergency C-section just as her mother was fading. She was a tiny fighter, just 4 pounds and 2 ounces, lying in an incubator, with no idea she would never meet the woman who already loved her so much. Rachel had sung to her every day and spent weeks choosing the perfect sunny yellow for her nursery. The doctors gave vague reasons for her death. They mentioned things like a sudden infection and organ failure. They just shook their heads and said that sometimes these things happen, that medicine does not have all the answers, and that they did everything they could. But I knew something they did not. I knew Rachel had been perfectly healthy throughout her entire pregnancy. She had that special glow that pregnant women get. I knew she was strong and full of life, with plans for a future that should have lasted for many more years. And I had a terrible feeling deep in my gut that something was seriously wrong with how quickly she had died. The priest was talking, his voice a soft drone of prayers and comforting words that did little to soothe anyone. He spoke about God's mysterious ways and the peace of eternal rest. I could hardly hear him. I just stared at the coffin, at the beautiful white roses on top of it, and the picture of Rachel next to it. She was smiling, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. That is when the large wooden doors at the back of the church burst open. The loud sound echoed through the quiet sanctuary, stopping the priest mid-sentence. Every single person turned to see who had caused the disturbance. The bright afternoon sun streamed in, making it hard to see the two figures standing in the doorway. Then, Marcus Morrison walked into his wife's funeral as if he were annoyed to be there. He was dressed in an expensive charcoal gray suit that must have cost at least $3,000. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he had the look of a man who always gets what he wants. He walked slowly and confidently, his face set in a serious expression that did not quite reach his eyes. But it was not Marcus who caused the whole room to gasp. It was the woman with him. Jessica Crane strolled into the funeral, holding Marcus's hand, acting like she completely belonged there. She acted as if she had a right to be by his side, as if she was not the woman he had been cheating with while his wife was carrying his child. She was 28 years old, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair that looked very expensive. She was beautiful in a way that suggested a lot of time spent at the gym and a very strict diet. Her simple black dress was clearly designer, tailored to show off her body, while still looking somewhat appropriate for a funeral. Her high heels had signature red soles that clicked loudly on the marble floor, the sound echoing offensively in the quiet church. As I watched her walk up the aisle with my best friend's husband, I felt a cold rage build inside me. Behind me, I heard Rachel's mother let out a heartbreaking sound. Betty Johnson was 61 years old, a woman who had faced many hardships in her life. She had worked 2 jobs at a diner in Tennessee for 30 years just so her daughter could have a better life. She had driven for 14 hours straight to get to this funeral, probably in the same old car she had owned for years. She had already buried her own mother and her husband, and now she was bearing her only child. Through all of that, she always remained strong and graceful. But seeing her son-in-law walk into her daughter's funeral with his mistress was too much for her. She made a noise that sounded like a wounded animal, a cry of pure pain that rose above the whispers in the room. Then her legs gave out. I managed to catch her just before she hit the floor, holding her tightly as she sobbed uncontrollably. I learned something important in that moment as I stood there holding a grieving mother. When someone shows you their true colors during the worst moments, you should believe them. Marcus was not being cruel because he was in pain. This was not a mistake made out of shock or confusion. This was the real Marcus Morrison, finally taking off the mask he had worn for so long. He was showing everyone his true self. I have seen people act horribly under pressure before, but I have never seen anything like this. I have never seen someone show up to his pregnant wife's funeral in a $3,000 suit, with his mistress on his arm and a slight smile on his face. Marcus led Jessica to the front row, to the seats reserved for the family. He sat them right in front of the coffin of the woman he had promised to love for the rest of his life. He sat down without even looking at Betty, the woman who had raised his wife. Jessica sat next to him, crossing her ankles as if she were at a casual lunch, her expression mostly blank, except for the hint of a smile on her lips. The whispers immediately started spreading through the church like a wildfire. I saw people taking out their phones, trying to be discreet but failing. They were openly recording the entire scene. By the time Marcus was settled in his seat, I knew this whole shocking event was about to go viral. The gossip was already spreading through the church, a nasty web of whispers and phone notifications, all while my best friend Rachel's body was lying in her casket, less than 20 feet from us. The priest had trailed off mid-sentence. He just stood there at the podium, looking completely lost. His carefully prepared speech about heaven and God's plan felt like a joke in the face of what was happening. For a few seconds that felt like an hour, nobody moved. The air was so thick with tension, you could almost taste it. A bitter mix of shock, anger, and something else that felt strangely like excitement. Then, a man named Thomas Whitmore, an attorney, stood up. I had only met him once, 3 days before, when he'd called me to his office to tell me things about Rachel I never knew. He revealed a side of my best friend I'd never seen, showing me she was in the middle of a high-stakes game none of us even knew existed, and the final moves were about to be played. He was a man of 58, with the kind of classic good looks you see in old money families from Connecticut. His silver hair was swept back from a high forehead, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to take everything in while giving nothing away. After 30 years as a corporate lawyer, he'd switched to handling estates, and he carried the quiet confidence of a man who had seen it all and was surprised by nothing. He walked to the front of the church with calm, deliberate steps, his face serious and composed. The priest simply stepped back, handing over the podium without a single word. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitmore said, his voice reaching every person in the room without any effort. There was a command in his tone that made people stop whispering and sit up a little straighter. It even made Marcus look up from his phone. And for the first time since he'd walked in, I saw a flicker of concern on his face. "Before we finish this service," he announced, "I have been instructed by Rachel to read her last will and testament, right here, right now, in front of all the people she loved." He paused, letting his eyes scan the crowd, finally resting on Marcus and Jessica in the front row. His next words were spoken softly, but they landed like a punch to the gut, and in front of everyone who betrayed her. Marcus's smug posture faltered just for a second. Next to him, Jessica's perfectly manicured fingers squeezed his arm, her knuckles turning white. Whitmore pulled a large envelope from inside his suit jacket, the kind reserved for official documents. He held it up for everyone to see before he slowly and methodically broke the seal. I didn't get it at the time. I had no idea what Rachel had been scheming, what secrets she was holding, or what kind of empire she was quietly building, while we all just saw a sweet elementary school teacher who made crafts about butterflies and frogs. But as I stood in that church and watched the blood drain from Marcus Morrison's face, I started to realize something huge. Rachel knew. She had known all about the affair, the lies, and everything they had done to her behind her back. And she didn't just roll over and play the victim. She got ready. I watched Marcus squirm in his seat as 200 pairs of eyes stared at him with open disgust. What none of them realized, what even I didn't know until 3 days ago, was that Rachel had spent her final months setting a perfect trap. And every single person who had ever hurt her, who had ever dismissed her, who had ever looked at her sweet face and saw weakness, had just walked right into it. To truly understand how we got here, with my best friend gone and her husband's mistress sitting in the front row like she owned the place, we have to go back. Back before the cheating, before the secrets, before the brilliant plans she made in the dark. We have to go back to the beginning of a love story that was destined to end in both heartbreak and victory. Rachel Ann Johnson was raised in a trailer park just outside a tiny town in rural Tennessee. It was the kind of town nobody puts on a map, the kind of place everyone dreams of leaving. Her mother, Betty, worked back-to-back shifts at a roadside diner. She would come home at 3 in the morning, smelling like stale coffee and fried food, her feet swollen and her body aching. But she always had a warm smile for her little girl. A father was never part of the story. Betty refused to talk about him, and Rachel quickly learned not to bring it up. But Rachel had something else, a sharp, brilliant mind that her teachers noticed right away. It made her stand out from all the other kids in their underfunded school, and it made the guidance counselors marvel, saying things like, That girl could do anything if she just gets a real opportunity. Betty Johnson was going to make sure her daughter got that opportunity. She picked up extra shifts anytime she could. She started cleaning houses on the side for the rich families across town. She saved every single dollar that wasn't for food or rent, stuffing cash into old coffee cans and hiding it under her mattress. By the time Rachel was 17, she had earned a full academic scholarship to the University of Virginia. She burst into tears when the acceptance letter came. Betty cried right along with her, standing in their small kitchen, holding her daughter's future in her hands. All those years of sacrifice had finally paid off. Rachel showed up to college with just 2 suitcases, $300 in cash, and a burning desire to succeed that was almost frightening. She juggled 3 different jobs throughout her time at the university. She was a waitress at a diner near campus, serving privileged college students who almost never tipped, and local folks who barely noticed she was there. She also tutored students who were failing economics and business, subjects she had taught herself using library books. On weekends, she cleaned the dorms, scrubbing toilets for kids who would never even bother to learn her name. Through all of that, she maintained a perfect 4.0 grade point average. She was on the dean's list every single semester. She graduated with top honors and earned the deep respect of every professor she had. It was there that she met Marcus Morrison. He was her complete opposite, rich where she was poor, well-connected where she was alone, and he had the easy confidence that only comes from never having to struggle for anything. His family's money went back for generations. It was that old Connecticut wealth, built on smart investments, inheritances, and the kind of deals made at exclusive country clubs and on private yachts. Marcus was failing his economics class when Rachel was assigned as his tutor. He strolled into their first meeting 20 minutes late, wearing a polo shirt that cost more than her entire collection of clothes. And he looked at her as if she were there to take his coat. In hindsight, that should have been the end of it. Knowing what I know today, I can see all the red flags that Rachel either missed or decided to ignore. There was his casual sense of entitlement, the unspoken belief that his time was more important than hers, and the way his eyes scanned her old laptop, her worn-out clothes, her practical shoes. You could almost see him adding it all up and deciding she wasn't worth much. But a man like Marcus Morrison doesn't get ahead without knowing how to read a room. He saw something in Rachel that day. Maybe he was drawn to her intelligence, or maybe it was her simple beauty, the kind that didn't need expensive clothes and makeup to stand out. Or maybe it was something more calculating. Perhaps he saw a woman who had fought for everything she had and figured she'd be pathetically grateful for any attention he decided to give her. So he changed his approach. He started arriving for their sessions on time. He began bringing her coffee, and he even remembered exactly how she liked it. He asked her questions about her life, her family, and what she hoped for in the future. And he seemed to listen with real interest. He started pursuing her with everything he had. He would show up at the diner where she worked, ordering cups of coffee he never drank, just so he could watch her. He sent enormous bouquets of flowers to her small apartment, the kind that must have cost a small fortune. He even wrote her notes, which were surprisingly charming for a guy like him, who had never known a single day of hard work in his entitled life. Rachel fought it at first. She was smart. She understood that they were from completely different worlds, that his family would never approve of a waitress's daughter, and that fairy tales were just stories for kids. Happy endings were for people who never had to stress about making rent. But Marcus was persistent, charming, and a master at telling her exactly what she longed to hear. "I will never be like them," he promised her, one evening, when she finally told him why she was keeping her distance. The wealthy kids who look down on everyone else. That is not me, Rachel. I love you for who you are, not where you are from. Your past does not matter to me. She believed him. God help her, she actually believed him. They were married 5 years later at his family's exclusive country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. I was the maid of honor, standing next to my best friend in a dress I found on a clearance rack and tailored myself. I watched her face light up with a happiness so pure it made my own heart ache with joy for her. Did you know that Rachel made her own wedding dress? She designed it and sewed every stitch by hand for 6 months because Diana Morrison, Marcus's mother, refused to buy a gown for someone she called the help. Trailer trash does not get a Vera Wang. Diana had sneered, not realizing I was just around the corner, listening to every single toxic word. No matter how much perfume you use, trash is still trash. I should have told Rachel. I have replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times since, wondering if things would have turned out differently if I had just opened my mouth and told her the truth. But she looked so unbelievably happy that day, standing at the altar in her handmade gown with flowers woven into her hair, speaking her vows to a man she loved with every piece of her soul. I just could not bring myself to ruin that moment for her. Perhaps that makes me a coward. Perhaps it makes me partly responsible for everything that happened next. I have had a very long time to think about it, and I still do not have the answer. The wedding reception was a mix of beauty and horror. It was beautiful because Rachel was absolutely glowing. The location was breathtaking, and for a few hours it truly felt like love could overcome the vast differences between two people from opposite sides of the tracks. It was terrible because I saw Diana Morrison glide through the room, dripping poison into every guest's ear, making sure they all knew her true opinion of her new daughter-in-law. Give it 5 years, I heard Diana tell a woman covered in diamonds, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. You can take the girl out of the trailer park, but you cannot take the trailer park out of the girl. The novelty will fade, and Marcus will come back to the values he was raised with. 5 years. That was Diana's grim forecast. She was wrong by 3 years. The first 2 years of their marriage seemed happy, at least from the outside. Rachel and Marcus settled into a gorgeous apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He began his career at a top investment banking firm. She landed a job teaching 3rd grade at a private school in the city, shaping young minds and coming home with stories about her students that made her entire face light up with joy. And then Rachel found out about Marcus's gambling problem. He had lost $50,000 at an Atlantic City casino, $50,000 in one weekend. It was money they did not have, money he had charged to their joint credit cards, and a loan he had taken out in both of their names without ever telling her. He broke down and cried when she confronted him. They seemed like real tears anyway. He dropped to his knees in their living room, begging her to forgive him. He swore it was a one-time mistake and promised it would never happen again. He said all the things people say when they are caught, feeling desperate and not yet willing to truly change. Rachel paid off his debts with her inheritance. Her grandmother had spent 50 years working as a housekeeper, scrubbing toilets and floors for rich families who likely never bothered to learn her name. When she passed away, she left Rachel $50,000, every single penny she had saved over half a century of backbreaking work. Rachel handed it all to Marcus without a second thought, with no resentment, because she loved him. She believed in their marriage and thought that was what a good wife was supposed to do. I told her she was out of her mind. We were in my queen's apartment, sipping wine from coffee mugs, since all my wine glasses were broken. I looked her right in the eye and said something I remember perfectly to this day. Girl, the only bet you should be making on that man is whether he will remember your anniversary. You do not gamble with your retirement fund, your grandmother's entire life savings, or your whole financial future. She just laughed and told me I worried too much. She said Marcus had learned his lesson. She insisted that every marriage hits a few bumps, and this was just one of theirs. I truly wanted to believe her. I really did. It was around that time that Rachel began what she called her little hobby. She had developed some teaching materials for her class, things like lesson plans, worksheets, and activities that her students adored. A coworker suggested she try selling them online through a platform for teachers, and later on Etsy. Just for fun, Rachel told me. A little side money, maybe enough for a nice vacation one day. Marcus was completely dismissive. He came home one afternoon while Rachel was on her laptop, designing a lesson about butterflies and life cycles. He glanced over her shoulder with a smirk that made my own fists clench when Rachel told me about it later. "That is cute, honey," he said. "You should stick to teaching and leave the business side of things to me." Rachel just smiled, nodded, and went right back to what she was doing. But I knew my best friend. I knew her better than anyone, or so I believed. And when she told me that story, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes I had never seen there before. It was not hurt, or disappointment, or even acceptance. It was something sharper, colder. It almost looked like she was calculating. Looking back now, I believe that was the exact moment everything shifted. That was the moment Rachel stopped being the sweet, naive girl from Tennessee who believed in happily ever afters and started turning into someone else entirely. Someone patient, someone strategic, someone who could be dangerous. But I did not get it back then. I failed to see what was really going on behind my best friend's gentle smile and kind heart. I just assumed she was coping with a difficult situation. I thought she was adjusting. I believed she was doing what countless women have done for centuries when they feel trapped in a bad marriage with no easy way out. I had absolutely no clue that she was quietly building an empire. 6 months before the funeral, Rachel was 6 months pregnant and looked more beautiful than I had ever seen her. Pregnancy agreed with her, defying all the horror stories you hear from other women about swollen ankles, morning sickness, and unpredictable skin. She was simply luminous, softer around the edges, in a wonderful way. She always had one hand resting on her stomach, as if she were guarding something precious. And of course, she was. We met up for lunch on a Thursday in early spring. We went to a small cafe in Brooklyn that served the kind of expensive avocado toast that social media influencers only pretend to eat. Rachel was already at a table by the window when I got there. The sunlight was pouring in, making her look like a classic painting of a mother-to-be. But I knew immediately that something was wrong. I saw it as soon as I sat down. There was a faint tightness around her eyes that her smile did not quite reach, and a tension in her shoulders that told me she had been having sleepless nights and making tough choices. "Just tell me," I said, skipping the usual small talk. We were too close for that. Rachel took a long, deep breath. Then she reached into her bag and slid a credit card statement across the table. "I found this last week," she said. "Look at the charges, the third one from the bottom." I looked. The charge was from a jewelry store, Tiffany and Company, for $4,300. "He bought me jewelry," Rachel said, her voice completely empty of emotion. "The thing is, he never gave me any jewelry. No necklace, no earrings, no bracelet. Nothing. Maybe it is a surprise," I suggested, but the words sounded weak even to me. Maybe he is just waiting for a special occasion. Rachel slowly shook her head. I checked our closet. All of his drawers and his home office. There is no little blue box hidden anywhere. There is no receipt for a future pickup. There is nothing. So where did $4,000 worth of jewelry from Tiffany go? Rachel's eyes met mine across the table, and what I saw in them made my stomach lurch. It was not surprise or confusion or even anger. It was resignation. It was as if she already knew the truth and had just been waiting for the proof to appear. That is what I need to figure out, she said. She did not confront Marcus about it immediately. I was learning that was not Rachel's way anymore. She had spent years watching her mother handle difficult people with intelligence and careful planning. She had learned that knowledge was a form of power, and that the person who reacts first is not always the one who comes out on top. Instead of causing a scene, she hired a private investigator. His name was Mike Callahan, a retired New York City police detective who specialized in what he politely called domestic surveillance. Rachel paid him with money from her online business selling teaching materials. She mentioned to me that it was doing pretty well these days. At the time, I did not think much about that comment. Pretty well could have meant anything, like a few $100s a month, just enough to pay the investigator without touching the joint bank accounts that Marcus watched like a hawk. I did not yet understand what pretty well really meant. The pictures arrived in less than a week. Rachel phoned me on a Wednesday night, her voice having that specific kind of steadiness that told me she was holding on by a thread. "Can you come over? Marcus is working late. There is something you have to see." I rode the subway up to her apartment on the Upper East Side, that gorgeous home with its soaring ceilings and elegant moldings I had always quietly coveted. When Rachel answered the door, her eyes were rimmed with red, and she was clutching a manila envelope to her body, as if it held a viper. In a way, it did. With shaking hands, she laid the photos out one by one on her dining room table. There was Marcus with a blonde woman at a restaurant in Tribeca, their heads leaning in close. His hand was on top of hers, on the crisp white tablecloth. There was Marcus with the same woman, this time checking into a boutique hotel in Soho, their arms wrapped around each other. And there was Marcus and the woman on a beach, which the geotag identified as Martha's Vineyard, strolling by the ocean's edge, just like a couple on their honeymoon. The woman's name was Jessica Crane, 28 years old and a junior associate at Marcus's investment firm. She had 87,000 followers on Instagram, where she posted perfectly staged photos of a luxurious lifestyle I now knew my best friend's husband was paying for. "How long?" I asked, not entirely sure I could handle the answer. "The investigator believes it has been at least 8 months," Rachel said, "possibly more. Before I even got pregnant. Maybe before I even knew I was having a baby." We just sat there for a long time. The photos spread between us like exhibits in a trial, which I suppose they were. "What are you going to do?" Rachel's jaw set into a hard line. "I am going to think. I am going to make a plan. And then I am going to make sure that when I make my move, I am prepared for anything that happens." She waited another full week before confronting Marcus. She spent that time getting ready, although I had no idea just how meticulously she was preparing, or for what. When she finally mentioned the affair, they were in the kitchen of their beautiful apartment. Rachel was perfectly calm and in control, holding the pictures in her hand as she asked a single, simple question. "How long has this been going on?" Marcus made no attempt to deny it. He offered no apology. He didn't drop to his knees begging for forgiveness like he did when she found out about his gambling. Instead, he went on the attack. "You have been so boring since you got pregnant," he said, and every word hit her like a physical blow. "The baby, nursery colors, pediatricians, that is all you ever talk about. What kind of stroller we should buy? It is draining, Rachel. I get home from a long day at work, and I need a partner who can hold a conversation about something other than pregnancy issues. Every word was a calculated strike. Rachel just stood there, 6 months pregnant, one hand naturally resting on her belly, taking it all in. Jessica understands the kind of pressure I am under, Marcus went on. She appreciates what I do for a living. She never nags me about being home for dinner or putting in too many hours at the office. She is supportive. She is fun. She is everything you were before you turned into this incubator. Incubator. He called his pregnant wife an incubator as casually as someone might comment on the rain. But Marcus was far from done. It was as if years of cruelty had been simmering just below the surface, held in check by the thinnest layer of decency he could manage. And now it was all spilling out like poison. What are you going to do about it anyway? Leave me? And with what money? You have absolutely nothing, Rachel. Not without me. That teacher's salary of yours wouldn't even cover the rent for a tiny studio in this city. And your little side business, selling lesson plans, please, that is a hobby, not a real income. He took a step toward her, towering over her, using his size to intimidate. Your mother was a waitress in some greasy spoon diner, and you are exactly like her, a nobody, a charity project. I pulled you out of that trailer park and gave you a life you never could have dreamed of on your own. Everything you have, everything you are, you owe to me. His voice lowered to a whisper, which was somehow even more menacing than his shouting. If you even think about divorcing me, I will ruin you. I will take this apartment, I will take our bank accounts, and I will take the baby. My family has the best lawyers in all of New York. Lawyers who have been working for the Morrisons since before you were even born. Your family has nothing, no money, no influence, no power. You will waste years fighting me in court, and in the end, you will walk away with nothing. You will be right back where you started, broke and alone, living in some rundown apartment, and maybe seeing our daughter on weekends if you get lucky. Is that what you want? Is that the life you want for our child? Rachel said nothing. She couldn't. Her voice was gone, stolen by the sheer scale of his cruelty, by the crushing realization that the man she had married, the man she had loved and sacrificed for, had been a complete illusion. He left for his evening with Jessica, and she drove to a parking garage on Fifth Avenue. For 2 hours, she sat in her car and cried until there was nothing left, until her eyes were swollen shut and her throat was raw, and her hands ached from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. She called me from that garage, sobbing so hysterically I could barely make out her words. I wanted to drive straight into Manhattan, to wrap my arms around her and tell her it would all be okay, but she refused to let me come. She told me she needed time to think. She said she had to figure out her next step. I learned something that day that I have never forgotten. When a man tells you that you are nothing without him, he is not making a threat, he is making a confession. He is revealing his deepest, darkest fear, the truth that keeps him up at night. He is absolutely terrified that you will one day realize he is the one who is nothing without you. He is afraid that all his power and money and connections are meaningless if you choose to leave, that his entire identity is built on keeping you small, and if you ever stood up to your full potential, he would be exposed as the pathetic, insecure little man he truly is. After those 2 hours in the parking garage, Rachel wiped away her tears. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number I had never seen before. "Tom?" she said, her voice completely steady now, with a coldness that sent a shiver down my spine when she told me about it later. "It is Rachel. I think it is time. Get everything started." That was the moment I learned the truth about my best friend, a secret she had kept hidden for 6 years, building it quietly while the world only saw a sweet teacher who sold worksheets about butterflies. Her business selling teaching materials was no hobby. It was not just something that paid for a nice vacation every now and then, or a fancy dinner. It was a $47 million corporation called EduSpark Digital, the single largest independent teacher resource platform in the United States. It had hundreds of thousands of subscribers, partnerships with school districts all over the country, and revenue coming in from subscriptions, licensing deals, and corporate training programs. Rachel had built the entire thing herself, piece by piece, working in the early mornings and late at night while Marcus assumed she was just grading papers or planning her lessons. She had incorporated the company in Delaware long before they were married, placing every single asset into an irrevocable trust her husband could never get his hands on. She had hired staff, negotiated major contracts, and made strategic decisions that had turned her little side project into a powerhouse. And Marcus had no idea, not a clue. He thought she was making a couple $100s a month selling worksheets. He thought she was nothing without him. He thought he held all the cards in their marriage. He believed he could bully her with threats of poverty and custody battles, certain she had no other choice but to obey. He was about to get the shock of his life. 3 days after that awful fight with Marcus, Rachel met with her attorney, Thomas Whitmore, at a small cafe in Brooklyn she had picked because she knew none of their Upper East Side friends would ever be caught dead there. I was there too, because she insisted. She said she needed a witness, someone she trusted completely, who could confirm that every move she was about to make was legal, documented, and beyond question. Tom Whitmore had known Rachel's mother for decades. Years ago, when he was just a young prosecutor making a name for himself on small-town cases, he worked a case near Betty's diner. Betty had kept him supplied with coffee and pie and had listened to him vent about his long hours and his difficult cases, and they struck up an unexpected friendship that had endured all these years. When Rachel needed legal advice on how to start her business, she called Tom. When she needed help structuring the company to shield it from a husband she was already growing wary of, she called Tom. And when she finally understood that her marriage was a sham and she had to protect herself and her unborn child, she called Tom. He laid the documents out on the cafe table with the smooth efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Still, I could see a definite sparkle of satisfaction in his eyes as he outlined what Rachel had created. The company is held in an irrevocable trust, he explained, his voice low even though we were tucked away in a private corner booth. It was established before your marriage and funded entirely with your own earnings. Marcus has zero legal claim to any of it. He cannot touch it, he cannot dissolve it, he cannot even know it exists, unless you decided to tell him. He pointed to another document. This is a record of his activities, his gambling debts, his financial schemes, and proof of the affair, complete with dates, places, and photos. It details every lie he ever told you, every promise he ever broke, and every time he went into your joint bank accounts without you knowing or agreeing. I stared at the huge stack of papers, at the incredible amount of proof my best friend had collected, while none of us had any idea. How long have you been putting this all together? For 6 years, Rachel said, with a steady voice. It started the first time I found out he was gambling. I knew something was seriously wrong back then, even though I did not want to believe it. So I began keeping a record of everything, just in case it was needed. She had been a wife for 8 years, and for 6 of those years, she had been quietly and systematically gathering evidence against her own husband. She was getting ready for a day she prayed would never arrive, but she was far too intelligent not to be prepared for it. What do we do now? I asked. For now we wait, Tom explained. Rachel has to have the baby safely first. We have to make sure the child's future is secure before we take any action. And we have to be certain that when we finally do something, Marcus has nowhere to run, no hidden money, no legal tricks, and no way to flip the situation back on Rachel. Rachel agreed, placing a hand on her pregnant stomach. And I discovered something else, she added, something that changes the entire game. She then told us about his plan for Costa Rica. Marcus was getting ready to empty their joint accounts right after the baby was born. He had already purchased plane tickets for himself and Jessica. His plan was to grab every dollar he could and then vanish to a country that does not send criminals back, leaving Rachel with only a newborn baby and a huge amount of debt. He has been moving money in small amounts for months, Rachel explained. Amounts so small they wouldn't set off any alarms. The only reason I discovered it is because I have been watching our accounts like a hawk. Then she smiled, but it was not a sweet smile. It was the look of a chess master who sees her opponent has just stepped into a trap she set long ago. He has no idea that I know, she said. He does not realize that I have been 10 steps ahead of him this whole time. He thinks I am naive. He thinks I am fragile. He believes I have no other choices. That is about to become his greatest mistake. I recall leaving the cafe that day with a wild mix of feelings swirling inside me. I was proud of my friend, who had shown more resilience and strategic genius than anyone I knew. I was scared of what was coming, of the fight that was about to begin. And there was another feeling, something I could not identify right away. Perhaps it was the shock of realizing that the woman I thought I knew, my kind Rachel, who would cry during sad commercials, adopt stray animals, and design school lessons about butterflies, had also been secretly building a $47 million empire. While her husband believed she was just playing the role of a housewife. Document everything, she said to me as we walked toward the subway station. That was her advice. The wisdom she shared from 6 years of surviving a marriage to a man who would have ruined her if he had the chance. Take screenshots, make recordings, save bank statements. When you are up against someone who has more power than you, information becomes your only weapon. Build a collection of evidence, Claire. You never can tell when you might have to use it. I thought it was good advice back then, the kind of thing you agree with and store away, never thinking you will actually need it. I had no idea how quickly those words would become the very thing that saved me. The weeks that came after were full of tension and hope. Rachel performed her role flawlessly. She was the devoted, pregnant wife who was completely unaware, who worried about nursery paint colors and what to name the baby, all while her husband continued his affair with more and more boldness. She would smile when Marcus got home late, smelling like Jessica's perfume. She would nod understandingly when he claimed his weekend trips were work emergencies. She just waited and watched and wrote down everything. One afternoon, she called me, her voice filled with barely controlled excitement. I found his escape plan. I found all of it. The secret accounts in the Cayman Islands, the plane tickets to Costa Rica, and the fake passport he had made for himself. A fake passport? It seems he has been planning this for a lot longer than I first thought. He has a completely separate identity prepared, ready to use the second things get difficult here. She laughed, and it was a sound of pure victory. He has no clue that I have copies of every single thing. He believes his secret email account is safe because he chose a password he thought I could never figure out. He does not know I installed a key logging program on his laptop 3 years ago. Oh my gosh, Rachel. I know, she replied, sounding almost giddy with success. I know it seems extreme, but you have to see it from my side, Claire. I have lived with this man for 8 years. I know exactly what he can do, and I knew from the very start that if our marriage ever went sour, I needed to have some insurance. What will you do with all that proof? Nothing, for now. I am going to wait until Hope is born, until she is safe and healthy and legally protected, and then I am going to bring his entire world crashing down. It was the first time she had ever told me the baby's name, Hope. She was naming her little girl, Hope, and in that moment, despite all the darkness, I really believed that everything was going to turn out all right. I believed that Rachel had thought of every possibility and that she was going to emerge victorious. I should have known that life does not stick to a plan, that even the most carefully made strategies can fall apart when faced with things that nobody could ever see coming. But I did not know what was about to happen. None of us did. 3 horrible events occurred in just 2 weeks, one right after the other, like a chain reaction designed by pure cruelty. Any one of them would have been a disaster by itself, but together they almost destroyed everything that Rachel had worked so hard to build. The first disaster happened without any warning at all. Rachel was at Jefferson Elementary School, speaking to a room full of parents at a regular meeting about their children's reading skills. She was in the middle of explaining how a student who had been struggling was now improving when she felt a sudden, sharp pain deep in her belly. Then she felt a rush of warmth down her legs. She looked down to see blood pooling on the floor beneath her. The next several hours were a whirlwind of sirens, rushing down hospital hallways, and doctors talking in serious, urgent voices. They needed to do an emergency cesarean section at 32 weeks. The baby was coming far too early. The placenta had broken away. The doctors had to operate right away, or they would lose both of them. Hope Morrison was born at 4:15 in the afternoon on a rainy Thursday in September. She weighed just 4 pounds and 2 ounces, but was a tiny fighter. She was immediately taken to the neonatal intensive care unit, where machines and monitors would help her stay alive, while her small body learned to do the things it had not had enough time to prepare for. Rachel survived the operation, but just barely. She had lost a very dangerous amount of blood, and her blood pressure fell so low that the doctors were not sure she would survive the night. But she did survive, because Rachel was never one to give up, because she had too much left to do to let go now. She woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, feeling so weak she could barely lift her head, her entire body aching with pain and exhaustion. The very first thing she asked for was hope. The second thing she asked for was her phone. She was unable to set her plan in motion from a hospital bed. She could not meet with Tom Whitmore, or keep an eye on Marcus's accounts, or get the legal papers ready that would shield her daughter. Every single day she spent trying to recover was another day that Marcus might find out what she had been creating. Another day he might figure out a way to twist the situation. Another day he could escape to Costa Rica before she had a chance to stop him. I went to see her every day, bringing magazines she never looked at and smoothies she could hardly sip. I saw her get more and more worried as her body wouldn't heal on her schedule. She was supposed to be in control right now. She was supposed to be strong. Instead, she was stuck in a hospital bed, relying on doctors and nurses, and on a husband who barely ever visited and never stayed for long. That was the first disaster, the moment she lost precious time, strength, and control. The second disaster arrived 3 days later, taking the form of a visitor Rachel never expected. Diana Morrison walked into the hospital room carrying a bouquet of flowers and a cashmere blanket for the baby. She wore a casual outfit that likely cost more than my entire monthly paycheck. Diana kissed Rachel's cheek with lips that had never learned to show genuine warmth, then sat down in the chair by the bed as if she planned on staying for a long time. "I came to help," Diana said, her voice as sweet as poison. "Marcus is swamped with work, and you need someone to take care of you while you get back on your feet. We are family, after all." Rachel was too exhausted to put up a fight, too tired to see the way Diana's eyes kept darting toward her phone on the nightstand, or to her laptop sitting in its bag by the window. She was too medicated to recognize the predator hiding in plain sight. I went to the hospital that afternoon to see Rachel, bringing a bag of her favorite cookies and a book I thought she might like. I pushed the door to her room open, thinking I would find her resting alone, or perhaps with a nurse, checking on her. Instead, I saw Diana Morrison leaning over Rachel's nightstand. She was holding Rachel's phone, her eyes glued to the screen as she scrolled through something with fierce concentration. Rachel was fast asleep. The machines next to her bed beeped in a steady rhythm, delivering the medicine that kept her sedated so her body could heal. She had absolutely no idea what was happening just 3 feet away from her. "Diana," I said, and my voice came out as sharp as a razor's edge. She glanced up, and for a split second I saw a flash of triumph in her eyes, the look of a hunter who had finally trapped her prey. Then it vanished, replaced by a friendly smile and an innocent look that could have fooled anyone not paying close attention. "Claire, my dear, I was only checking to see if Rachel had any urgent messages. You know how she gets worked up about that little business she runs." She placed the phone back down and calmly gathered her belongings. "I really have to go, but I will be back in the morning. Please make sure she gets plenty of rest." She swept out of the room as if she had done nothing wrong at all, leaving behind the faint smell of expensive perfume and a cold, sinking feeling in my stomach that something awful had just occurred. The second Diana was gone, I snatched Rachel's phone. I did not have her passcode, but the lock screen showed the recently used apps, email, notes, documents. Every single one of them had been opened within the past hour. I gently woke Rachel and explained what I had seen. As I spoke, all the color drained from her face. Her hands shook as she took the phone from me and looked through her activity history, confirming everything Diana had looked at. There were emails about the divorce, text messages to Tom Whitmore, and documents that mentioned Idu Spark and its $47 million valuation. "She knows," Rachel whispered in horror. "She knows everything." That night, Diana called Marcus. We only figured out what she said to him later, when all the pieces of the puzzle finally came together. She told him about Rachel's secret company, about the divorce papers she was having drawn up, and about all the evidence Rachel had collected against him. She revealed everything. The next morning, Marcus Morrison stormed into the hospital like a hurricane. He burst into Rachel's room right as she was trying to breastfeed Hope for the very first time. Her body was still incredibly weak, and her mind was hazy from the medication. The baby wasn't latching, and Rachel had started to cry out of pure frustration. And then suddenly, her husband was there, standing over her bed, with a look of pure rage in his eyes. "You think you can just leave me?" His voice was a low hiss, quiet enough not to alert the nurses in the hallway, but sharp enough to feel like a knife. "You think your little website for teachers is going to scare me? I know everything now, Rachel. My mother told me everything." He leaned in closer, so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I will destroy you in court. I will take Hope from you. My mother will testify that you are mentally unstable, that the pregnancy messed with your mind, that you are an unfit mother. You will never lay eyes on your daughter again." Hospital security finally escorted him out 10 minutes later, after a nurse heard Rachel's sobbing and came to check on her, but the harm had been done. All of her careful strategies, her detailed preparations, and her hopes for a straightforward victory were destroyed by her mother-in-law's spying and her husband's uncontrollable anger. She cried for hours after he was gone. She just held Hope in her arms and wept until there were no tears left. She cried until her eyes were swollen completely shut and her voice was gone, until the monitors at her bedside began to sound an alarm. That was the second disaster. The loss of her secrets, of her element of surprise, of her advantage. The third disaster was the most terrible of all. In the days that followed, Rachel's health took a sharp turn for the worse. The doctor said it was an infection, but they seemed confused by how aggressive it was. They gave her powerful antibiotics, but nothing seemed to make a difference. Her fever shot up, and her organs began to show signs of distress. Her recovery, which should have been moving forward, was now going in the complete opposite direction. I started to notice something strange during Diana's visits. She came every single day now, acting deeply concerned and bringing a special herbal tea from a wellness brand in Connecticut that she insisted would help Rachel heal. "It is an old family recipe," Diana would say, placing a warm cup into Rachel's trembling hands. "My grandmother swore by it. My mother used it. It has healing powers that you just cannot find in a pharmacy." Rachel would drink it just to be polite, to avoid a conflict when she was too weak to argue. The night after Diana's third visit with the tea, Rachel's monitor started blaring. "Code blue," a voice announced over the hospital intercom. "Crash cart to room 417. I was in the waiting room when I heard it, having fallen asleep in an uncomfortable chair after refusing to leave the hospital for 3 days straight. I heard the announcement and I knew, with a horrible certainty, that it was Rachel's room. I sprinted down the hall and pressed my face to the window of her door, watching in terror as a team of doctors and nurses surrounded her bed. Her heart had stopped and her organs were shutting down. She was dying right there in front of my eyes, and all I could do was stand there and pray. I prayed to a God I was no longer sure I even believed in. They managed to revive her twice. After the second time, they were not sure she would pull through, but she did. She always did. The next morning, when she finally opened her eyes, I was sitting right there by her bed, holding her hand, as if my touch alone could keep her anchored to this world. She looked at me with a startling clarity that cut through all the drugs and exhaustion, and she said 3 words that changed the course of everything. "Diana is poisoning me." "Rachel," I began, about to write it off as paranoia or the fever talking, as anything but the truth. My own gut was screaming at me. I saved the cup. Rachel's voice was faint but firm. "The last cup of tea she gave me. It is in the drawer of my nightstand. Get it tested, Claire, and get samples of my blood and hair from the hospital. Make sure the chain of custody is documented." She gripped my wrist with a surprising amount of strength. "I am not going to survive this. I can feel it, Claire. Whatever she is giving me is winning, but I refuse to let them win. Not Diana, not Marcus, none of them." She made me promise her that day. She made me promise to show everyone the video she had recorded, to make sure the world was watching when the truth was revealed, and to protect Hope no matter what. I made those promises, and I fully intended to keep every single one. I just had no idea at the time what it would cost me. Rachel was transferred to a hospice facility on a rainy Tuesday morning, just 3 weeks after Hope was born. The infection had spread, defeating every antibiotic the doctors threw at it. Her organs were failing in slow motion, shutting down one by one, like the lights in a house being turned off after a party has ended. The doctors were completely stumped and frustrated. A healthy 32-year-old woman should not get sick this fast, they kept saying. There has to be something we are not seeing. But I knew exactly what they were missing. I had sent the teacup to a private lab to be analyzed, using money Rachel had insisted I take from a secret bank account she kept for emergencies. It would take time to get the results, time that Rachel no longer had. But I already knew in my heart what they would find. Diana Morrison had been poisoning her own daughter-in-law, slowly and deliberately, with the kind of patience that suggested she had been planning this for months, maybe even years. Detective Sarah Brennan found me in the hospital cafeteria the day before Rachel was moved to hospice. She was a tough-looking woman, 45 years old, with 20 years of experience on the force, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that you only get from seeing the worst of humanity and still finding a way to carry on. I knew her mother, Brennan said, as she sat down across from me with a cup of coffee that looked like it had been brewing for days. Betty Johnson. I worked a case at her diner a long time ago when I was a rookie cop who still thought she could save the world. She was the sweetest woman I had ever met. Her daughter was too, from what I can recall. She took a long drink of the terrible coffee and looked at me closely. Something is not adding up here. Healthy young mothers do not just fall apart like this for no reason. The medical team is clueless, which usually means they are not looking for something because they are afraid of what they might find. What are you trying to say? I am saying that I am looking into this, quietly, and off the record for now until I can find something concrete. But if you know something, anything at all, that could explain why a perfectly healthy young woman is dying in that hospital bed upstairs, then you need to tell me now. I explained everything to her, about the teacup, Diana's regular visits with the herbal tea, and Rachel's certainty that her mother-in-law was poisoning her. Brennan listened quietly, her face growing more serious with every word I spoke. When I finished, she said, "Get me that lab report, and anything else Rachel has documented. If this is what it seems to be, we are going to need every single piece of proof we can find." Rachel spent her final days in a hospice room that had a window looking out onto a garden she was too frail to ever walk in again. The late afternoon sun poured through the glass, bathing everything in a golden light. The machines beside her bed made soft beeping sounds, counting down the time she had left. I was there with her every day, holding her hand, talking about big things and small things. Sometimes she was completely clear-headed, as sharp as ever, even with all the medication and her failing body. Other times, she would drift off, whispering about butterflies, lesson plans, and a little girl named Hope she would never get to see grow up. On her last good day, she had me make the promise one more time. "I wrote letters," she said, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "For Hope. One for every birthday until she turns 18. For her first day of school, her first broken heart, her graduation, and her wedding day." Tears streamed down my face. "Rachel," I began, but she gripped my hand with a surprising amount of strength. "Let me finish. I wrote letters for all of it, for everything I am going to miss, for everything I ever wanted to say to her. My words will be there for her even when I can't be." She took a shaky breath, and I wrote something else, a different kind of letter, for Marcus, for Jessica, and for Diana. The type of letter they won't be able to ignore, or brush aside, or act like they never received. She gave a small smile then. It was weak and sad, but it was still fierce. It was still Rachel. "They think I am dying weak and defeated. They believe they have won, that they got away with everything, that the girl from the trailer park finally got what was coming to her. They have absolutely no idea what is about to happen, Claire. No idea at all. I spent 6 years creating a $47 million empire. While my husband thought I was at home making worksheets about butterflies and the life cycle of frogs. I beat him at every move, and he never even realized we were playing a game. If that doesn't make me a good wife, I don't know what does." She let out a soft laugh that turned into a cough, her entire body shaking from the effort. "Promise me that you will play the video. Promise me that everyone will be watching, especially Diana, especially Marcus, and especially his little Instagram princess. I promise," I told her, and I meant it with every part of my soul. "Promise me you'll look after Hope, that you'll raise her to be a strong woman. Tell her about me, the real me, not the victim they'll try to paint me as. Tell her I fought for her until my very last breath. I promise. promise me you will complete what I started. There is a folder at Tom Whitmore's office. It's labeled Phase 2. If Marcus ever makes a threat against Hope, if he ever dares to try and take what belongs to her, you open that folder and you burn his entire world to the ground. I promise, Rachel. I promise you all of it. She passed away at 3:47 in the morning on a cold Tuesday in October. I was the only person with her, holding her hand as the monitors went flat and the room fell silent. The nurses came in and out. The hospice chaplain spoke words that I couldn't hear. Outside, the rain that had been coming down all day finally let up, and the first sign of dawn started to brighten the sky. Her last words were a whisper so quiet I almost didn't catch them. Make them watch, Claire. Every last one of them. I plan on it, I said to her, even though she was already gone. I certainly plan on it. Attorney Thomas Whitmore stood at the front of St. Andrew's Church, holding the envelope in his wrinkled hands, as 200 people held a collective breath, waiting to find out what Rachel Morrison had left behind. Marcus was in the front row with Jessica next to him, looking more irritated than worried. He thought this would just be a formality, a fast reading of a basic will that would give everything to him, the grieving husband. He had no idea what was about to unfold. I, Rachel Ann Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament. Whitmore's voice was strong, reaching every corner of the packed church. He read the introduction slowly, deliberately, building the suspense in a way that made even me want to yell at him to just get to the point. Then he got to the first major surprise, and the entire room changed. To my daughter, Hope Elizabeth Morrison, I leave all of my shares in EduSpark Digital, a company that I founded and built from the ground up over a period of 6 years. These shares are being placed in an irrevocable trust, which will be managed by my dear friend and sole trustee, Claire Bennett, until Hope turns 25 years old. He paused to let the words sink in. At the time of my passing, EduSpark Digital was valued at $47 million. Current estimates predict the company's value will reach $80 million within the next 2 years. A loud gasp echoed through the church. Marcus's head shot up, his expression changing from boredom to confusion and then to a look of pure terror. "That is not possible," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear him. She sold lesson plans online. She made maybe $200 a month. Whitmore looked down at him with the kind of patient disgust a teacher might have for a particularly dense student. Mrs. Morrison was the sole owner and chief executive officer of EduSpark Digital, the biggest independent platform for teacher resources in the United States. The company was founded before your marriage and was held in a trust that ensured it was completely separate from any marital assets. You were never told about it because Mrs. Morrison chose not to tell you. Diana Morrison jumped to her feet. "This is fraud!" She concealed assets from her husband. "That is against the law. It is perfectly legal," Whitmore answered calmly. The company was created before the marriage. All of its growth was financed by the company's own profits, not with marital money. I have records going back 6 years that prove Mrs. Morrison built this business on her own, without any help from Mr. Morrison. "I suggest you sit down, Mrs. Morrison." Diana did not sit down. She just stood there, trembling with fury, until Marcus finally yanked her back down into the pew. Marcus tried to compose himself. I could see him pulling his scattered thoughts together, fixing his tie, and trying to force a calmer look onto his face. "Fine," he said. "Whatever. As Hope's father, I will be the one to manage the trust until she is old enough. The money is staying in the family." Whitmore didn't even blink. "I am not done, Mr. Morrison, and I think the next part will clear up your ideas about parental rights." He clicked a button on a small remote, and a large screen came down from the ceiling behind the casket. Rachel's face appeared, recorded in her hospice bed, only a few days before she died. She looked awful, so thin and pale, with deep, dark circles under her eyes. Her body was clearly giving out, but her eyes were still burning with life, fierce, and almost entertained in a way that made my heart ache with both pride and sadness. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice was faint but came through the speakers clearly. "Jessica, Diana, if you are seeing this, it means I am gone, and you three are probably feeling pretty good about yourselves right now." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Surprised about the money, of course, but you figure you will work it out. You believe you will get hope, get control of the trust, and find some legal trick your expensive lawyers missed. You think you've won, because people like you can't even imagine a world where a person like me could ever outsmart you." Another pause, a smile that sent a chill down my spine. "You have no idea what's about to happen, so I suggest you sit down, be quiet, and pay attention." Class is now in session. The video kept playing, and with every moment that went by, the world that Marcus, Jessica, and Diana had built began to crumble. "Jessica," Rachel said, "I want to say thank you. I know that probably sounds strange, but just listen. When I first discovered you were having an affair with my husband, I was completely heartbroken. I cried for 3 days without stopping. I thought my entire life was over, that everything I had built had been torn down by a 28-year-old Instagram model who couldn't keep her hands to herself." She paused for a moment, and her smile became razor sharp. "But then I got angry, and after that, I got smart. And when I started looking into Marcus's secrets, I mean really looking, I stumbled upon something fascinating about my own life, something I had never even thought to check before." Documents flashed onto the screen behind her, DNA test results with official headings and clinical text. "Marcus, Hope is not your daughter." The church erupted into chaos. People were shouting, gasping, and jumping out of their seats. Marcus's face turned as white as a sheet of paper, his mouth hanging open as he tried to speak, but no sound came out. "I had an affair too," Rachel went on, her voice steady, amid the commotion. "It was one time, 3 years ago, right after I found out about your first big gambling debts. The ones you swore up and down were a one-time thing. I met a man at an education conference who treated me with respect, who saw me as a person, not as some trophy or a project he was fixing. He actually listened to me when I talked, instead of just waiting for his own turn to speak." She shrugged on the screen. "I am not proud of what I did. I was taught that marriage vows were sacred, but I am not sorry for it either. The DNA results are attached to my will, legally witnessed and notarized. You have zero biological connection to Hope. She would have no parental rights and no legal claim to custody. A lawyer will get in touch with the man who fathered her, and the decision to be a part of her life will belong to him and my daughter alone." Marcus looked like he was about to throw up. Next to him, Jessica sat completely motionless, the color draining from her perfectly made-up face. And now for Diana, my loving mother-in-law. Diana flinched as if she had been struck. Her polished exterior cracked, revealing something hideous beneath. "Detective Brennan," Rachel said, "I know you are in the audience. I specifically asked Tom to invite you. I saw Brennan make her way through the crowd, her badge already on display. Her face was a mask of professional calm, like someone who knew this moment was coming. I have reason to believe Diana Morrison has been poisoning me," Rachel went on. "It was in the herbal tea she brought to my hospital room each day. I kept the last cup. My attorney, Mr. Whitmore, is currently holding it as evidence, with a fully documented chain of custody." Diana scrambled to her feet, trying to get to the aisle, but Brennan was faster, casually blocking her way with practiced ease. I also kept samples of my blood and hair from my hospital stay, Rachel said, which are also documented and being held as evidence. The test results should be back any day now. I have a feeling they will show high levels of thallium, a heavy metal that creates symptoms of natural illness and is almost impossible to find without very specific tests. Diana's voice became a shrill cry. This is ridiculous! She was delusional. The pregnancy messed with her mind. I have never poisoned anyone in my life. On the screen, Rachel seemed to have known this was coming. Diana will likely claim I was mentally unstable, paranoid, and not thinking clearly. But I was a straight-A student and a national merit scholar. I created a $47 million company while everyone around me assumed I was just making coloring sheets about butterflies. Does that sound like a person who has lost her mind? The third bomb dropped with the force of a physical blow. Marcus, let us discuss your job, particularly the $2.3 million in gambling debts you owe to some very dangerous men in Atlantic City. We should also talk about the money you have been stealing from Morrison and Associates to pay for those debts. Documents filled the screen, showing bank statements, wire transfers, and betting stubs. It was a trail that led through fake companies and offshore accounts, all of it perfectly organized and explained. I have already sent copies of everything to the SEC, the FBI, the IRS, and your company's ethics committee. By Monday, you will no longer have a license to practice law. By Friday, you will most likely be in handcuffs. And those men in Atlantic City, who have been waiting so patiently for their payment, will be very curious to find out that their debtor is no longer able to pay them. Marcus was now visibly shaking, with beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His $3,000 suit suddenly seemed like a cheap costume that no longer fit him. But Rachel was not done yet. Oh, Jessica. One last thing, my dear. Jessica, who had been trying to inch away from Marcus, froze on the spot. I know that you have been selling Marcus's insider trading secrets to Greg Holloway, his greatest business competitor. I have the emails, the Venmo records, and the text messages where you called Marcus a useful fool who is too self-absorbed to realize he is being manipulated. A text conversation appeared on the screen. Jessica's face crumbled. Marcus, your mistress has been tearing down your career from the inside. While you were so focused on tearing me down, she has been secretly working for your rival this entire time, giving him every bit of important information you were foolish enough to tell her. You were convinced she loved you. She saw you as just a rung on her ladder. I suppose that makes the two of you a perfect match. Marcus spun around to face Jessica, his eyes filled with rage. You were working for Greg? Jessica's calm facade shattered into a million pieces. Marcus, I can explain everything. It is not what it looks like. I was only trying to protect myself in case everything fell apart. You were selling my secrets. I could end up in jail because of you. That is unbelievable. Jessica shrieked back. You are the one who stole money. You are the one buried in gambling debts. I just made sure I would be okay when you finally messed everything up for good. They screamed at one another in the front row of the church as 200 guests watched and dozens of phones recorded every single word. What was supposed to be my best friend's funeral had turned into the most shocking reality show anyone had ever seen. Never misjudge a quiet woman, Rachel's voice said from the screen, cutting through the noise. Still waters are not just deep. Sometimes they are concealing a tidal wave, and sometimes that tidal wave has spent 6 years figuring out exactly where all the weaknesses are. Police cars pulled up to St. Andrew's Church less than 20 minutes after Rachel's video concluded. Detective Brennan had requested backup after the second revelation, knowing what was about to happen and getting ready to act on 6 years of collected proof. Diana Morrison was led out of the church in handcuffs, her protests bouncing off the high ceilings. She mentioned her family's name, her attorneys, and her powerful friends in Connecticut. But none of that made a difference. The officer leading her up to the police car seemed completely unimpressed by her complaints. "I have rights," Diana yelled. "I want to speak to my lawyer." "This is slander. That woman was crazy. I never poisoned anyone." The lab tests confirmed everything 2 days later. It was thallium, just as Rachel had guessed. It was a slow-acting poison that builds up in the body over time, making it look like an infection or organ failure. Diana had been giving her daughter-in-law small doses for weeks, possibly months, with the careful planning of someone who had thought through every single step. She was going to spend the rest of her days in prison. Marcus was handed federal subpoenas before he even left the church property. The SEC, the FBI, the IRS. His law firm fired him before the day was over. They put out a press release, calling him a disgrace to his field and an embarrassment to the entire legal world. All of his assets were frozen while the investigation continued. The plane tickets to Costa Rica hidden in his desk would go unused. The loan sharks came looking for him 3 days later. Marcus had been denied bail because he was a flight risk, so he was safe in federal custody when two very large men appeared at his empty apartment, demanding their money. They left angry, but were not giving up. Men of their kind have very long memories. Jessica Crane was arrested and charged with 17 counts of insider trading, conspiracy to commit fraud, and being an accessory to financial crimes. Her booking photo was all over the internet within hours. Her mascara was smeared, her hair was a mess, and her expensive dress was wrinkled from her time in a jail cell. Her Instagram followers plunged from 87,000 to under 8,000 in one night. The comments were brutal. "This is what you get for choosing a married man over your morals. Imagine throwing everything away for a man who is already losing it all." She really thought she was the star of the show. Plot twist, she was the warning sign. I witnessed everything from a distance, feeling a strange mix of victory and sorrow. Rachel had achieved her goal. She had outsmarted every person who had ever looked down on her, and she did it all after she was gone. But she was still gone, and no amount of revenge could ever change that. 2 weeks after the service, Greg Holloway reached out to me through attorney Whitmore. He seemed anxious when we met, nervously playing with his coffee cup in a way that did not match the image of the ruthless tycoon Marcus had always painted. He was 40 years old, successful, and dressed in a style that suggested wealth without being flashy. But it was his eyes that really got my attention. They were kind and sincere, filled with a sadness that I recognized in myself. "I was in love with her," he said softly, "with Rachel. We were only together for 3 months, but I truly loved her. She was the most incredible woman I had ever known. She was smart, strong, and funny, and she had no idea just how special she was." He looked down at his cup. She did not want to leave Marcus at first. She believed she could repair the marriage, that she could fix it somehow. She kept saying that she had made a promise and needed to try everything she could before walking away. By the time she accepted that the marriage was broken beyond repair, she found out she was pregnant, and that is when it all began to unravel. He handed me a picture. It was Rachel on a beach somewhere, smiling for the camera with her hair blowing in the breeze. She looked more joyful than I had seen her in a very long time, maybe ever. "I did not know about hope," Greg admitted, "not until the funeral and the DNA results. Rachel never let me know she was carrying my baby. I believe she was trying to keep me safe, or perhaps she was trying to protect herself. She was certain Marcus would ruin her life if he ever learned the truth." He looked at me again, his eyes glistening with tears. "I want to be a part of Hope's life. I want to help raise her and provide her with everything Rachel would have wanted for her, This is not about the money or the inheritance or anything like that. It is because she is my daughter, and loving her is the only way I have left to show my love for her mother. I looked at him from across the table, this man that Rachel had chosen, even for a short, secret time. I understood what she must have seen in him, a sense of kindness and honesty, a genuine person in a world filled with men like Marcus Morrison. Hope needs a father, I said at last. She needs someone who will love her for exactly who she is, not for what she might represent. Are you able to be that person for her? Yes, he answered without any doubt. I can. I will. I give you my word, Claire. I kept my promise to Rachel. Over the next few weeks, we established a clear plan for joint custody. I was Hope's legal guardian, and Greg was officially recognized as her biological father. He established trust funds, set up college savings, and provided everything a child could possibly need. But he did more than just provide money. He was there every single day, without fail. He learned how to change diapers, how to mix a bottle, and how to sing the soft lullabies that sent Hope to sleep. He came because he wanted to, not out of obligation. That was the moment I finally let myself think that maybe, just maybe, we were all going to be okay. A full year went by. The seasons turned, leaves fell and bloomed again, and life pushed forward with its unstoppable momentum, even when grief made each step feel like an impossible effort. I passed the bar exam on my very first attempt. I was now a licensed attorney, fueled by Rachel's memory and driven by a sense of purpose I had never known. The trust provided me with a salary for being Hope's guardian. It was enough to finally let me stop worrying about rent and begin building the life Rachel would have wanted for us. Hope was a thriving, happy, and healthy 1-year-old who had her mother's eyes and her father's easy smile. She found laughter in everything, reached for the world with curious hands, and lived with a pure joy that reminded me why Rachel fought so desperately to protect her. My own daughter, Lily, who was now 9, had proudly taken on the role of Hope's official big sister. She would read her bedtime stories, help me with her baths, and tell anyone who would listen that her baby sister was the smartest and most beautiful baby in the whole world. Greg had relocated to New York just to be near them. He found an apartment 2 floors above mine, which was close enough for him to be a constant presence in Hope's life without disrupting the unique family we were creating. There was nothing romantic between Greg and me. Our bond was something different, perhaps even stronger. We were partners in the most significant undertaking of our lives. Edgewood Park was flourishing, now valued at $80 million and projected to reach $100 million by the end of the year. Rachel had personally selected the new CEO, left behind meticulous plans for the company's direction, and established an endowment to fund scholarships for the children of single mothers for many generations. It was named the Betty Johnson Scholarship Fund, a tribute to the woman who worked her entire life so her daughter could have chances she never did. Betty was now living comfortably in a house in Tennessee, all paid for by the trust. She had finally retired from the diner, finally given up working double shifts, and at last had the time to work in her garden and video chat with her granddaughter every Sunday. Hope's first birthday party was a small, perfect celebration. My apartment was filled with pink balloons, a handmade banner with Lily's enthusiastic, uneven lettering announced, "Happy first birthday, Hope." The guest list was small but essential. Lily, Greg, Betty, and Tom Whitmore. They were the people who had deeply loved Rachel and would now love her daughter in her absence. I rolled a small television into the living room as our small group came together. I explained that Rachel had recorded videos for Hope, one for each major life event: her first birthday, her first day of school, her first heartbreak, her graduation, and even her wedding day. Rachel had asked me to play them for her. A hush fell over the room. Then, Rachel's face filled the screen. She was in her hospice bed, but she had applied lipstick and fixed her hair, making a real effort to look like her old self as her body was failing her. The medical devices were visible in the background, the various tubes and monitors that defined her last days, but she had carefully angled the camera to keep them mostly out of view. That was so typically Rachel, considering the presentation even as she was dying. She began, her voice frail but warm, full of a love so powerful it reached beyond the recording. My darling Hope, happy first birthday, my sweet girl. If you are seeing this, it means I am not there to hold you, to cover your cheeks in kisses, or to watch you smear cake all over your face and laugh at the wonderful mess. A smile touched her lips, and for just a second, she looked almost healthy, almost like the vibrant Rachel I had known for 25 years. I am so sorry that I could not stay. I fought so hard for you, Hope, harder than I have ever fought for anything. But some fights just cannot be won, at least not in the way we hope. Sometimes the real fight is in knowing when to let go and trusting that the people you love will continue your work. Her eyes shimmered with emotion, but she did not cry. Rachel was always so much stronger than anyone ever realized. There's something important I need you to know. Everything I accomplished in my life, anything that truly mattered, was for you. I did not build a company because I was passionate about money or success, or even about proving people wrong, although I have to admit that part was fun. I built it to give you a shield, because I knew that people in this world would try to take what belongs to you. They would look at you and only see an opportunity for themselves. I wanted you to have your own armor, your own resources, and your own independence. I wanted you to never have to depend on anyone for your survival. That way, when you choose to let someone into your life, it will be because you want them there, not because you feel you have no other choice. She took a deep, unsteady breath. Be brave, Hope. Be kind and be smart. Work hard, but never so hard that you forget how to laugh. Love with your whole heart, but never so much that you lose who you are. Defend those who cannot defend themselves.